a couple questions.
And that frustrates me because some of the best ones, some of the very best people I'd like to put out in front of the Congress and the public, the best ones, I would say, are the ones that they throw the worst dirt at.
And the tactic is always the same, right? It's public humiliation, embarrassment in front of your family and kids, ruin your legacy, and whether you have done anything for us to blame you or not, we can fabricate it anyways and destroy your entire life.
Right, absolutely.
That's the strategy.
Go in and clean out your bank account.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know what would be a great insurance business is to find a way to protect you that if anybody ever tries to do that, you're protected from it. I don't know what the method would be to do that, but that would definitely be a big insurance industry if somebody could protect you from those types of things.
Well, you know what I did instead? I did what it's called my dead man trigger. And I have files that no one's ever seen. If something happens to me, and I put this in place in the late 90s after I was almost killed. And I said, yeah, if I just flat out get killed, the stuff that will hit blockchain and internet and sites that will curl your toes. I mean, the archive is mind-blowing, but the stuff I've redacted and these private files would be even more explosive. And I did it because, the first 3 people who were killed were back in that era. One of them was a former CIA director helping us. I don't know if you remember back in the Ford and Nixon and Ford era, there was a CIA director named Bill Colby. And Bill Colby was read in or briefed on this, was very much involved. And he was maybe pushing 80 and very fed up. And bless you. Thanks. And he was like, he was over it. So we knew what he was going to do. He was going to hand off to us one of these 0-point quantum energy generation devices, free energy, and initially about $50 million in seed money just to get that going and hand it off. But he wanted to do it clandestinely, which I thought was very dangerous. He should have done it on CNN or news or the whole press conference. But he wanted to do it that way. So there was a colonel who was on my team who was his best friend. And the week he was going to meet with a member of my board, Bill Colby, the former CIA director, was found floating south of D.C. in the river, made to look like a canoeing accident. Even his wife went on CNN and said he would not have been out there canoeing in a rain-swollen river at dusk. And he was killed. And his friend, who was a colonel, said, oh, absolutely. Yep. So that was a shot across the bow. That was in 1995 during the Clinton era. And what people don't, a lot of people don't think that kind of thing happens. And of course, the media said it was an accident. His son, unfortunately, thinks he committed suicide, which he didn't. And that's a terrible thing. They think your father committed suicide. He did not commit suicide.
What's the story of what happened with Nikola Tesla when he got out in a cab and, that whole story?
Yeah, well, he knew too much too. When Albert Einstein was asked by a reporter, what's it like being a genius? You know what he said? I wouldn't know, ask Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was probably the great genius of the 20th century. And he died a poor man, a bitter man. Most of his huge breakthroughs never saw the light of day. He had one of these sort of electromagnetic generators that was free energy. J.P. Morgan famously told him, if we can't put a meter on it and charge, like the utilities, it's not coming out. I mean, we're talking 20s here, 100 years ago. So, it didn't help that he was a genius and had these breakthroughs. And that's why it's like 24 trunks of secret papers. And the day he died, we can prove this, in this archive is a Department of Defense memo to the FBI demanding that the FBI turn those over. And I don't know if they ever did. I mean, that happened in 1943. The document, it's not contested, it's authenticated document, was from the 1980s. So eventually someone at the Pentagon realized what the FBI was sitting on in a compartmented Black Project, and they wanted it. So, untangling the history of this, of course, we'd be here for a week, but it's all in the archive. I mean, it's laborious to go through. It'd probably take people 2 years just to partially read it and see it. But, I just want to say one thing that's missing out of the archive is that I've done I think it's about 20 intelligence briefings that are being rewritten with links that aren't in the archive yet. That'll be the first category. Right now there are 13, so it'll be 14 with this one. And it will relate to each of the categories: crash retrievals, military whistleblowers, technology, the black budget of the United States.
We'll put the link below to go. So go back to Nikola, though. So what happened that day? New Yorker, he's getting out the hotel. I'm trying to see how I read the story. Cab hits him, and you're thinking maybe there was an inside job that, broke his ribs or...
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who knows? I mean, one of the things that Gordon Crichton said, he was a MI6 guy in England. His testimony is in he's a British intelligence guy. It's in our archive. He says, if you become too troublesome, they just erase you. They get rid of you. I heard that term first in the 90s, erasure. They just erase you. I think that, like I said, my coming of age of this, I was fortunate that when I first started out on this in the early 90s, there was a naval intelligence guy who I thought was an infiltrator, but he was actually very sincere. I didn't know what an unacknowledged special access project was. I'm a doctor. I'm an emergency doctor and 4 kids and a golden retriever in the suburbs, right? So I had no idea. But, he took me under his wing and mentored me, and I learned a lot. And it was a very steep learning curve. And that was before I briefed the CIA director. So by the time I briefed the CIA director, I knew all this. Structure, let's call the structure of the secrecy. And I think that's the hardest thing for senators and congressmen to understand, or the general public. How is this structured? That a president will be told, we're not going to tell you, right? And a few presidents have quipped. I know that President Carter was at an event in Spain. I have a friend who was there, and he was asked, what was it like being the most powerful man in the world? And Mr. Carter said, I don't think I was that person. And they said, why? He said, there were things that as president I wasn't allowed to know about. And someone kind of giggling, joking, kind of making fun of it. Oh, you mean UFOs? And he said, yes, that and more.
Carter said this.
Carter said that, President Carter.
In an interview?
No, in a dinner after an event in Spain. But I have a man on my team who was there. So this is a real issue. This is a huge governance, because you're talking unconstitutional. So let's cut to the chase here. These operations are illegal black projects, not legal ones. There are legal black projects that the president and the Gang of Eight in Congress oversee. But these are illegal, meaning there's no oversight, and they're being run as a criminal operation. And I'll just call it out. They are not only criminal, but they're treasonous, because they absolutely will defy the chain of command. So here's a really good example. This correspondence is in the archive. There's a man who had been the head of what's called J2, head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, J2, and Admiral Wilson. And a memo leaked out a few years ago, not my doing. It was after astronaut Edgar Mitchell, the 6th man to walk on the moon. After he died, someone leaked this out of his archive, because I had brought Dr. Mitchell, astronaut Mitchell, to a briefing at the Pentagon that I was doing a stand-up briefing for Admiral Wilson. And Admiral Wilson was very sincerely wanting to find out about what was going on with this issue. So before the meeting, I sent him a secret document that has not been declassified, which is in the archive. By the way, this is different from the trouble the president's in with classified material. We declared all these projects unconstitutional and illegal in the 90s, documented it, and therefore I have in this archive classified top secret and secret documents for the public to see, and they have not been declassified. I'll just put that on the table. So this document, it was an NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, which runs all the super secret spy satellites, right? And it was from Area 51, Nellis Air Force Base in 1991. And they were warning of some civilians trying to spy on what was going on at that secret facility from some mountaintops overlooking the facility. So they'd have what was called a security alert. But in that document, which I acquired, I won't say how, it listed the project code names and numbers. And that's in the archive. Anyone on Earth can see it now, as of the 90s. So I sent this to Admiral Wilson, along with some other briefing material, and he made an inquiry. Now, remember, this is the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States. And by the time I got to this meeting, he was scared to death and furious because he made inquiries through channels based on the information we had provided. And he discovered the offices and the compartmented operations dealing with the UFO matter. And he was flat out told, you don't have a need to know. And he said, I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. How do I not have a need to know, for God's sake? They said, we will not discuss this with you. When he pushed on it further, they threatened him. And they also threatened with taking a star off his lapel, a demotion to retire him, where he would lose a big pay cut in retirement. So that is a fact. Now, the same thing happened to the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Google it. The Defense Intelligence Agency is like the CIA, but for the military intelligence. The director, General Patrick Hughes, I spent hours briefing at the Pentagon. He had a similar thing happen. And he made inquiries through channels and was flat out told nothing. Now, there have been people who have been read in those positions, others haven't. Why do some CI directors or J2 or whoever know and others don't? Well, we talked about a moment ago. They're tapped early, they come up through the system, and they're carrying water for this criminal operation.
Well, I had Woolsey on the podcast a few years ago.
He denies all this.
When I spoke to him, I said, so, what was your experience like as the director of CIA? Mm-hmm. He says, you realize I never met Bill Clinton. I said, what do you mean? He says, I never met the president. We never had a meeting. Never communicated with me. He says, I think I had one encounter was just like when I got appointed or do you want the job or not, and that was it. But there was no communication. And I think he was only the director of CIA for 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, maybe even less than 2 years.
About 2 years.
Can you look up the time? I said, yeah, it's less than 2 years when he was a director of CIA. Mm-hmm. So to me, based on what you're saying, was he one that knew or is he one that doesn't know anything? He's not at the levels of knowing what's really taking place.
At the time we met, he didn't know. I think later when he left the CIA, he was pulled into some operations where he knew, which is why he says very equivocal things about the issue. The same thing is true of Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, who is probably at the top of the pyramid of this covert group keeping this secret. I'll tell you a very almost comical story.
Is he alive?
He was as of a few months ago.
So he's at the top of the pyramid.
He's very senior. Mr. Cheney, him, and a few other people.
Have you spoken to him? Have you had meetings with him?
I had. Have you ever heard of Senator Barry Goldwater?
Of course.
Well, he was hugely interested in what we were doing.
He was
Goldwater, and I went out to his place in Scottsdale. And
what year was that?
It was in the 90s, and he was friends with Admiral Inman, and so Senator Goldwater was always trying to find out about this. Even when he was running for president, he was chairman of various committees in the Senate, and John McCain took his seat. So I'm sitting at his house, and Senator Goldwater, starts saying, well, I've given him all the information I have, and he tells me two very interesting things.